Easter Island sits in the middle of nowhere, literally. It's the most remote inhabited point on Earth, 3,700 kilometers from the nearest continent, 2,000 kilometers from the nearest island with people on it. If you dropped a pin there on a map, you'd be looking at nothing but ocean in every direction for hours of flight time. So here's what makes no sense. The people who lived there, the Rapa Nui, spoke a language, and that language has words in it that a Tagalog speaker would recognize, not vaguely, not with some imagination, directly. The word for I in Tagalog is mata. In Rapa Nui, it's mata, identical. The word for fish in Filipino traces back to a root word, ikan, that in Rapa Nui became ika. Same root, barely changed. The word for five in Tagalog is lima. In Rapa Nui, it's rima. One sound shift across 3,500 years and 8,000 kilometers of open ocean. That's not a coincidence. That's a fingerprint, and it points back to the Philippine archipelago. Now, the version of this story most people know goes like this. Filipinos and the people of Easter Island share distant Austronesian ancestry. They're related the way cousins are related. Same family tree, different branches, different destinies. It's a nice story. It's also incomplete. What the linguistic evidence actually shows, confirmed by 3 decades of comparative linguistics and genomic studies published in Nature and the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, is something more specific. The direct ancestors of every Polynesian who ever lived passed through the Philippines. The language that became Rapa Nui descended from a language spoken in Luzon, and the people who eventually reached Easter Island carried a genetic and linguistic signature that was assembled, consolidated, and launched from the Philippine archipelago. This isn't theory, it's peer-reviewed science, and it changes the answer to a question Filipinos have been asked their entire lives. Where do you come from? Today we're going to follow the evidence across 3,500 years and the width of the Pacific Ocean. We're going to look at the specific words that survived the crossing intact, words you can compare side by side right now. We're going to examine the 1,000-year pause that made the final push to Easter Island possible, and the unsolved mystery it left behind. And we're going to trace the precise archaeological and genetic line that connects northern Luzon to the most remote corner of the Earth. By the end of this video, you won't just know that Filipinos and the Rapa Nui share ancestors. You'll know exactly how it happened, and you'll never answer the question, where are you from, the same way again. Linguists call these cognates, words that descend from the same ancestral source. And when you find cognates this stable across this much distance, it means one thing: these languages didn't develop separately and happen to collide. They share a common parent, a single language spoken by a single people that eventually split, one branch staying in the Philippines, another branch crossing the entire Pacific. That parent language is called Proto-Malayo-Polynesian, and the leading evidence puts its origin in the Philippine archipelago, around 3,500 years ago. If you want to go deeper on the full Austronesian language tree, which Philippine languages are closest to Rapa Nui and why, I'll link a breakdown in the description. Before the first Rapa Nui canoe ever touched that shore, before Easter Island even had a name, people in the Philippine archipelago were already speaking the root language that would become Rapa Nui. The words didn't travel by accident. They traveled inside the mouths of sailors who crossed the largest ocean on Earth, generation by generation, carrying the same linguistic fingerprint the whole way. The word mata didn't change because it didn't need to. It was too fundamental. I, the thing you use to navigate by stars, the thing you use to read the ocean, mata, same in Manila, same on Easter Island, same ancestor. That explains the words, but it doesn't explain the route, because getting from the Philippines to Easter Island isn't a straight line, and what happened in between is where the story gets strange. There was a stop, a long one. Nearly 1,000 years where the expansion just paused. And what they built during that pause changed everything about how we understand human navigation. Here's what the expansion looked like from the outside. Starting around 3000 BCE, a people left Taiwan and moved south into the Philippines. From the Philippines, they kept moving, through Indonesia, into Melanesia, reaching Fiji, Samoa, and Tonga by around 1000 BCE. Island by island, generation by generation, always east, always deeper into the Pacific. And then they stopped. For nearly 1,000 years, the expansion went silent. No new islands settled. The people who paused in Western Polynesia didn't stagnate, they refined. They built double-hulled canoes capable of sailing directly into the wind, a technology that didn't exist anywhere else on Earth at the time. They developed navigation systems based on star paths, ocean swells, bird migration patterns, and cloud formations over land. They memorized routes that hadn't been sailed yet, passing the knowledge down through oral tradition across generations, waiting. And then, around 700 CE, something shifted. In less than 500 years, they colonized every habitable island left in the Pacific. Hawaii to the north, New Zealand to the south, the Marquesas, Tahiti, the Cook Islands. Each one thousands of kilometers from the last. Each one reached without instruments, without maps, without anything except the accumulated knowledge of 1,000 years of preparation. Easter Island was last. Or nearly last. It sits at the southeastern extreme of the Polynesian Triangle, the most remote corner of the most remote ocean on Earth. The best evidence puts the first arrival there between 1150 and 1280 CE. They came from the Marquesas, or possibly the Tuamotus. They came in canoes. They came with language, with tradition, with a cosmology built over millennia. And on that island, at the end of the world, they did something no other Polynesian people ever did. They invented writing. 27 wooden tablets, more than 400 distinct glyphs carved in lines that alternate direction, left to right, then the tablet rotates, right to left, a system called reverse boustrophodon that exists nowhere else in human history. The script is called Rongorongo. Linguists have been trying to decipher it since the 1800s. Nobody has succeeded. The last people who could read it died in the 19th century, killed by Peruvian slave raiders and European disease before anyone thought to write down what the tablets said. One partial exception. A section of one tablet appears to encode a lunar calendar. That's it. That's all we've confirmed in 160 years of attempts. What we do know is that the language those tablets most likely encode, ancient Rapa Nui, is a direct descendant of the same Proto-Malayo-Polynesian spoken in the Philippines 3,500 years ago. The linguistic fingerprint is there, even if we can't read the words yet. And then there's the physical evidence, the kind you can hold in your hand. The sweet potato is native to South America. It existed nowhere else on Earth, not in Asia, not in Polynesia, not anywhere in the Pacific, until Polynesian voyagers had it. Before any European ship crossed that ocean, before any known contact between the two hemispheres. The Rapa Nui were already growing sweet potatoes on Easter Island. The word for sweet potato in Quechua, the language of the Andes, is kumara. In Rapa Nui, it's kumara, the same word, on opposite sides of the Pacific. That means Polynesian voyagers, the same people whose descendants would reach Easter Island, didn't just cross the Pacific. They kept going. They reached the coast of South America, made contact with the people there, took a plant, and sailed back. Then they grew it. Then they named it with a word that survived the round trip intact. The long pause wasn't a rest. It was a preparation for the most extraordinary sequence of ocean crossings in human history, including one that nobody talks about, to a continent most people assume Polynesians never reached. Rongorongo is a mystery that may never be solved. And the sweet potato is a fact that most history books still haven't fully absorbed. But neither of them answers the deepest question. How did this all start? Where exactly did the people who eventually reached Easter Island come from? Because the answer isn't Taiwan. It isn't Samoa. The evidence points to one specific archipelago, and it's not the one most people would guess. Here's the version of history most people know. The Austronesian expansion started in Taiwan. From Taiwan, people moved south into the Philippines. From the Philippines, they kept going. Indonesia, Melanesia, Polynesia, Easter Island. The Philippines, in this version, is a waypoint, a corridor, a place people pass through on their way to somewhere else. That version is incomplete. There are 1,257 Austronesian languages spoken in the world today. That makes it the second largest language family on Earth by number of languages, behind only the Niger-Congo family of Africa. Every single one of them, from Madagascar in the west to Easter Island in the east, from Taiwan in the north to New Zealand in the south, descends from the same ancestral language, a language that passed through the Philippine archipelago. That's the scale of what we're talking about, not a regional migration, not a cultural exchange. The second largest language dispersal in human history, and it has Filipino DNA at its core. In 2021, a genomic study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences analyzed DNA from 1,028 individuals across 115 indigenous Philippine communities. The finding that stopped researchers: the Philippines wasn't just a migration corridor. It was the genetic crucible where the ancestry shared by every single Austronesian-speaking population on Earth was consolidated. Every Polynesian, every Micronesian, every person whose ancestors eventually reached Easter Island. The genetic signature that defines all of them passed through the Philippine archipelago first. But the linguistic evidence goes further. The Lapita people, the direct ancestors of every Polynesian who ever lived, including the Rapa Nui of Easter Island, are believed to have originated from the northern Philippines, specifically from Luzon. The evidence comes from pottery. The distinctive geometric designs on Lapita ceramics have direct parallels with pottery excavated at Nagsabaran, an archaeological site in Cagayan, northern Luzon. The same patterns, the same techniques, separated by ocean, connected by origin. And then there's the language itself. The strongest evidence that the Lapita were Austronesians, and specifically Philippine Austronesians, comes from linguistics. There is very considerable lexical continuity between Proto-Malayo-Polynesian, the language presumed to have been spoken in the Philippines, and Proto-Oceanic, the language presumed to have been spoken by the Lapita. The vocabulary didn't just overlap, it continued. The same words, the same grammatical structures, carried eastward from Luzon into the Pacific and eventually to the shores of Easter Island. This is what that means in plain terms. The people who built the MOI, the massive stone figures that made Easter Island famous, spoke a language whose grandmother tongue was spoken in the Philippines. The people who developed Rongorongo, the only writing system in all of Polynesia, inherited a linguistic tradition that began in Luzon. The people who navigated to the most remote corner of the Pacific did so using knowledge, language, and cultural frameworks that were assembled, refined, and launched from the Philippine archipelago. The standard story says Filipinos and Rapa Nui share distant ancestors. The evidence says something more precise. The Rapa Nui are, in a documented and traceable sense, descendants of the people who built their civilization in the Philippine Islands. Not cousins, not parallel branches, one line. Philippines to Lapita to Polynesia to Easter Island. A single thread 3,500 years long, stretching from Luzon to the most isolated point on Earth. And here's what makes that concrete in a way no map can. That same 2021 study found something inside the Philippines that nobody expected. The Cordillerans, indigenous peoples of the Cordillera mountain range in northern Luzon, are genetically the least admixed East Asians on the planet, meaning their DNA has changed the least since the original Austronesian expansion. They carry, more purely than any other living population, the ancestral genetic signature that all Austronesian-speaking peoples share. Every Filipino, every Hawaiian, every Maori, every Rapa Nui on Easter Island. The closest living genetic relative to the common ancestor of the entire Pacific, the person whose DNA connects Manila to Easter Island, is not in a museum, not in an ancient burial site, alive, in the mountains of Luzon, right now. The science didn't create that connection, it just confirmed what was already there. Mata, I, same word, same ancestor, same line, 3,500 years, 8,000 kilometers, 1,257 languages, one sweet potato that crossed the Pacific and back, and one genetic signature preserved in the mountains of Luzon that connects every Austronesian people on Earth to a single origin point. That's not a migration story. That's something else entirely. And it changes what it means to ask where Filipinos come from. Let's close the loop. We started with a contradiction. Easter Island, the most isolated point on Earth, and the Philippines share words that haven't changed in 3,500 years. Mata, Ika, Lima, not borrowed, not coincidence, descended from the same parent language spoken in the Philippine archipelago before anyone had conceived of crossing the Pacific. We followed the route. The Lapita, direct ancestors of every Polynesian who ever lived, originated from northern Luzon. Their pottery matches what was found in Cagayan. Their language, Proto-Oceanic, descends directly from Proto-Malayo-Polynesian, the language of the Philippines. They paused for 1,000 years in Western Polynesia, refined the most sophisticated navigation technology the ancient world had ever seen, and then in less than 500 years, reached every habitable island left on Earth. They even reached South America, took a plant, named it Kumara, and brought it back across the ocean. And at the end of it all, on the most remote island on Earth, they invented writing. 27 tablets, more than 400 glyphs, still undeciphered. The last people who could read them died before anyone wrote down what they said. That mystery is still open. It may never close. But here's what isn't a mystery anymore. The standard story says the Philippines is a waypoint in the Austronesian expansion, a corridor people pass through. The evidence says something more precise. Every Polynesian alive today, every Hawaiian, every Maori, every Rapa Nui on Easter Island carries a genetic and linguistic inheritance that was consolidated in the Philippine archipelago first. The closest living relative to that original ancestor isn't in a fossil record. It's in the mountains of Luzon. The Philippines wasn't a stop on the way to the Pacific. The Philippines was the launch point. The MOI weren't built by distant cousins of Filipinos. They were built by people whose civilization began in Luzon. The next time someone asks you where Filipinos come from, and they will, you have an answer that most people on Earth don't have access to yet. Not Spain, not China, not a single colonial chapter in a much longer story. The real answer starts 3,500 years ago, on islands that launched the greatest maritime expansion in human history, and ends at the most remote point on Earth, where a word for I, carried across the entire Pacific Ocean, arrived unchanged. Mata. Same in Manila, same on Easter Island, same ancestor. The most isolated people on Earth spoke your language. They just kept going.